Limit as z goes to 16 of 4 minus the square root of z over z minus 16. First thing we're going to do is try plugging a 16 in for each of the z's. That will be 4 minus the square root of 16 over 16 minus 16. The square root of 16 is a 4. In the numerator we have 4 minus 4, which is 0. In the denominator we have 16 minus 16, which is also a 0. We have the 0 over 0 indeterminate form. We will have to rework this. Since we have a root combination, which is a square root involving the variable z in some way, added or subtracted together with at least one other term, that's happening here in the numerator, we're going to have the root conjugate method. The root conjugate method is where we multiply the numerator and denominator by the root conjugate, a form of 1. So we have limit as z goes to 16 of 4 minus root z over z minus 16 times the root conjugate, which is the 4 and the root z root combination, but opposite sign between them, so it'll be a plus here instead. And we want to multiply the numerator and denominator both by that root conjugate so that we have a form of 1. We're not changing the value, we're just changing the look. When you multiply by a root conjugate in the numerator and denominator, you only want to FOIL out the root conjugate pairs. That turns out to be in the numerator here. We're going to FOIL this out. We're not going to FOIL the denominator. In the numerator, the first is 4 times 4, that's a 16. The outside is 4 times the root of z, that's a 4 root z. The inside is negative root z times 4, that's a negative 4 root z. And then the last is negative root z times a positive root z, which will be a negative z. Another thing about root conjugates, the outside and inside terms will always be the same value but opposite sign of each other. They will be able to cancel, so I will cancel those out. After multiplying by the root conjugate, it will turn it into one of the other 0 over 0 indeterminate forms. It's still 0 over 0 here. These are power functions, so we have 0 over 0 that we'll be able to cancel in some way. So we're going to look to factor and cancel. We have a 0 in the numerator because of the 16 minus z factor. In the denominator we have a 0 because of the z minus 16 factor. Those will be able to cancel, but not just yet. They're not exactly the same. They're opposite signs of each other. So we're going to need to factor a negative out of one of the two. Since there's less stuff in the numerator, I'm going to factor the negative out of the numerator. That'll change the z to be a positive and the 16 to be a negative. It'll just make them opposite signs of each other. And at this point, we can now cancel out the z minus 16 in the numerator and denominator. That is what is making 0 over 0. So we will cancel those out, leaving us with a 1 in the numerator with that negative. So we have the limit as z goes to 16 of negative 1 over 4 plus the root of z. We no longer have 0 over 0, so we can plug a 16 in for all of the z's. That will give us negative 1 divided by 4 plus the square root of 16. The square root of 16 is a 4, so negative 1 over 4 plus 4, or negative 1 over 8.